All right. All right, ready to go? Give it one moment. Anything? Oh, okay. Good? Okay. All right. All right.
Quick scan. My salary is on top of
Okay. It's about time to get started. Hey, good morning, everyone. My name is Chip Lichtewallner. I'm with I'm the staff engineer with Technical Services. Well, I guess we're pre-construction now. I'll be your room host for this session. We have one presentation lined up. So it's from planning to project delivery, implementing resilience across NCDOT. It's presented by Matt Laufer from NCDOT Hydraulics Unit, Amanda Killian from NCDOT Transportation Planning Division, Crystal Johnson from the NCDOT Geotechnical Unit, and Kurt Golombeski from NCDOT Hydraulics, and then Pam Cook from NCDOT SIPS. So please join me in welcoming our presenters.
Good morning, everybody. Really excited just to talk about resilience at NCDOT, and really excited just to work here with our presenters here. Again, Amanda, Crystal, Kurt, and Pam. So we're on the resilience program management team at DOT, and we're really glad to be here. So today we're just going to talk about resilience, what it is, how we look at it, and then we're going to look at integrating resilience into long-range planning, so how we're integrating into the thought process as we go through our projects. And then we're going to talk about rocks and landslides, some of those hazards, geotechnical hazards, and then we're going to talk about some of the hydraulic hazards as well in planning and design. And then Pam's going to kind of bring it all back in the framework for resilience at DOT. All right. So what is resilience? So the definition from Federal Highways, I think they've actually moved away from this right now. It was the administration change, but still it's a strong definition that's out there. And it's the ability to anticipate, prepare for, and adapt to changing conditions and withstand, respond to, and recover rapidly from disruption. So as we build our network, as we improve our network, as we manage our network, thinking about, how can we prepare for, anticipate events? How can we withstand and respond quicker to these disasters? And some of those thoughts go behind that. So integrating that thought process into the organization. So when you look at transportation resilience, measures typically increase project costs by 5 to 20%. I think I remember on I-95 when we were doing those improvements, it was I think about 27% the work we did there to improve resiliency along that study. But the benefit, though, becomes in the life cycle and the disaster cycle of those projects. So you can get often a 4-to-1 return on your investments. So, and that's been through studies, World Bank, National Institute of Building Sciences. So it's just saying some of this thought process that we put into resilience can really reap long-term benefits. Those two pictures up there are just from the Helene recovery. One's on the Cane, one's on the Noel-Chucky Toe. But the one on the left, that was spread footers on a 1977 bridge. Those spread footers were dialed into granite about 12 inches or more. I think there was even some rebar on that one. And, that one failed. But the one on the right there, Noel-Chucky Toe, those are drilled shafts. So even in our design processes, right, we're incorporating resilience into our structures, and they can survive and withstand these greater storm events. So we're making improvements there as well. So as we think about resilience, what's the goal? It's like to maintain and operate a resilient transportation network that performs well under current conditions as well as future. And then there's some key concepts that we think about in resilience: robustness, the ability to withstand a disruption, redundancy. We think a lot about redundancy. When we had Florence, Wilmington was pretty much cut off by land. So we had roads that were flooded all the way around. So the redundancy in routes was difficult. When we did 95, we were thinking at redundant routes, but there really aren't any good redundant routes around Lumberton. So, making sure that system's resilience is really important. Resourcefulness, the effective response capability. So how can I think about some of those roads up in western North Carolina where, if we lose a roadway embankment, how quickly can we put that thing back? And that gets into rapidity, but maybe if we design it so we just need to put riprap back and we're back in business, we're in good shape. So it depends what type of tier structure you're talking about. And then there's system performance outcomes that we look at, and those are up there again: absorptive capacity, ability to resist and limit damage, restorative capacity, restore service quickly, adaptive capacity, adjust to those changes, and then equitable access, again, maintaining mobility for all the users. And we try to do that through, as we think about, it's the life cycle of the project, right, from planning, design, construction, maintenance, operations. And just put this up there as well as for resilience. So when we think about resilience, you're thinking about those assets and the hazards that can, those assets are vulnerable to the hazards. So we have a lot of different hazards in North Carolina. We've got temperatures increasing, we've got sea level rise occurring, we've got hurricanes, landslides, rock slides, and just rainfall, right? Intense rainfall, whether it's riverine flooding or just intense rainfall events in local areas. And then as we think about that, and we want to look at like the exposure, and then we want to look at the vulnerability with respect to that exposure, and then we want to look at the investigate the options. So again, like what can you do there? Can you raise the road? Do you have another route that you can fix, that type of thing? And then you want to plan for that, and then you want to take action. So that process of thinking as we go through resilience is really important as we step through these things. And then the other part I really want to talk about is risk and resilience go together. And you're really trying to get to the benefit cost analysis of what you're doing. And so if we look at risk, there's risk is equal to the consequence of such an action, the vulnerability, which is a percentage, and a threat. So it's looking at the risk as the expected harm, and then the resilience is the ability to reduce that harm before, during, and after the event. And so if we look at that equation there, like if you're using it from a hydraulic standpoint, you're looking at like a 100-year event or a 25-year event or for the 50-year event. So what's that percentage threat chance? And then during that threat, what's the vulnerability of that damage occurring? And when you look at those two, there's a cost consequence to that, and then that gives you your risk. And so as we look at resilience, we're trying to reduce that vulnerability aspect of that to really reduce our risk. So, and then we want to get into the BCA, benefit costs, as you're looking at different alternatives, what makes sense with the resources and things that you have. So it looks a lot different on I-40 on your resiliency strategy versus something like you're looking at 19W, right? Those are some of the two examples of what happened in Helene out west. So one's a secondary road with like 1,500 ADT. One's an economic corridor that has a lot higher ADT and a lot more economic significance for the supply chain and that type of thing. So you need to be thinking about those as you're thinking about resilience. And then at DOT, we set up the program where we're the policy, program, and practice. We've got executive leadership driven, and a lot of this was, a lot of this came about after Florence. Some of it before with, and we'll cover some of that here later on in the presentation. But then there's also interagency coordination. It was with NCORE, and now it's with DEQ. So there's a lot that goes on, and then we periodically review the policy that we've set up in the department. We've also set up a program. We've got a disciplinary management team, which you see a lot of the folks up here at the table. And then we got a lot of local, state, and federal partners that we interact with. And then we monitor and report our accomplishments in a strategy report that we'll talk about as well. And then the practice, it's a lot of it about doing pilot studies, doing projects, showing the value of resilience and thinking about it in that process. And then data-driven tool development so we can understand our hazards better. And we're going to hear about that today as well. And then just the research and training that goes on as well. So hopefully part of this today is thinking about the training of that. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Amanda, and she's going to talk about integrating resilience in long-range planning. Thank you.
All right. Well, hello, everybody. My name is Amanda Killian, and I work at NCDOT's Transportation Planning Division. I work in the Coastal Plains unit, so my group kind of focuses on the coastal area of North Carolina. So for my presentation, I guess first I just want to give you a little overview of what the Transportation Planning Division does at NCDOT. Then I'm going to kind of dive into the background of our Comprehensive Transportation Plans, or CTP. I'll be saying CTP a lot, so that's what I mean by that. And then I'm going to focus in on how we've been adding in resiliency to our CTP, since that's kind of what this presentation is about. So here, these are the primary services of our Transportation Planning Division. So we do travel demand modeling. We have a team that looks at, model for the whole state. We work on comprehensive transportation plans, like I mentioned. That's something that I kind of primarily work on. And we also have a group that does traffic forecasting. And all of these groups, we all are working to collaborate with the MPOs and the RPOs in the state. We help them with their MTPs, we serve as support, and just work with them. And like I mentioned, I'm going to be talking a lot about CTPs in this presentation. So to get more into that, just a little bit of background in case you're not sure what a comprehensive transportation plan is. It's a high-level, long-range, needs-based plan. So we're looking 25 to 30 years out in the future. It comes before any prioritization or funding, so it's just very early-stage planning. This we develop cooperatively with NCDOT, our MPO and RPOs, as well as the municipalities, county. There's a CTP for about every single county in the state, and it's multimodal, so we look at highway recommendations, but we also have bike and ped recommendations, some transit, and this is a requirement of the NC state statute, so that's kind of how this came to be. Here's a little bit of the background and the steps of the CTP. The CTP usually takes, it can take up to 3 years to complete. So we form a steering committee in the very beginning with all of the representatives that will be involved in this. So we have someone from the MPO or the RPO, we have somebody from the county, and then local representatives from the different municipalities. We hold steering committee meetings about every month just to go over things. And we perform analysis. We look at traffic numbers for the future year and the current year, and just kind of work to identify the areas that maybe have congestion or other issues. And throughout those years, we put together a plan that everyone kind of agrees on, and then we take it for adoption and endorsement at the end, and then we close it out. So how do we get our recommendations for a CTP? So there's quite a few things that go into this. We look at the State Transportation Improvement Program at the STIP, and we like to include those projects. Now, some of those are funded, but we like to just include them for consistency. But we also look at local land development or land use plans, and we'll look at local and statewide transportation plans, bike ped plans, but we always do engineering analysis, so this is a needs-based plan, so we can't include everything in it. But if there's a need for it in the area, then we'll make sure that it is included in the CTP. And here's kind of a flow chart. Once we get to the end of the CTP, it has to go through adoption and endorsement. So first, the county and all the municipalities will adopt the plan. Then it'll go to the RPO or the MPO for endorsement. And then it goes to the NC Board of Transportation for a final adoption. And after that, we make a user-friendly booklet, and everything is posted online and distributed to the areas as well. And also, as we're working on this, we make sure to post updates online so people can stay up to date with what is going on. But just as a reminder, this is the very first step of project development, so this is just identifying the needs and putting it in a long-range plan. And here's some of the products. So we recently upgraded to CTP 2.0, so it's a lot more user-friendly. So we have this nice little booklet that we make, and it kind of just gives an overview of what we did, the steering committee, all of the work that went into this, and then we have these nice project sheets that go along for each of the projects that we've identified in the CTP. You can see that on the right there. And those project sheets have a lot of really valuable information. It will have the traffic volumes as well as the capacities. And it will also include a section at the end that just shows a lot of the public input that went into this and kind of just compiles everything together. And here's where the CTP lies in kind of the overall project process. So it's at the very beginning. It's before any of the prioritization or funding. It's just, a very high-level plan. And if it were to get funded in the future, then it would go through, detailed environmental review, even more public engagement, and design and all of that. So this is just the very first stage in project development. So now I'm going to switch into just kind of how we've been adding resiliency into our CTPs. So this is something kind of new. So NCDOT defines resiliency as the ability to anticipate, prepare for, and adapt to changing conditions. There's just a strong need to add this kind of more in our CTPs. I'm in the coastal area, so there's a lot of flooding out there, but also on the West Coast, they have a lot of landslides. And so there's just a strong need to kind of incorporate this more into our CTP process and add more of a guidance for that, so we knew what to follow. So we put together a team a couple years ago, kind of a committee, and we started kind of looking at how we can incorporate this into our guidance. We've been working for a couple years. And now we have on our website, you can go to that link there, scan that QR code. Here's our kind of official guidance that we put together. It just explains the purpose of it and the key benefits of it. And here's our old CTP steps, the 7 of them. But underneath that are the ways that we've added in resiliency to those steps. So one of the big things is just making sure that we include all of the key resiliency agencies from the very beginning of the process and just making sure that they're involved and aware of what's going on and just learning from them. We also do a community understanding report at the beginning of our CTPs. So just adding in some questions with resiliency on that has been key too. And then when we're going through and analyzing all of the data for the CTP, we obviously pull in a lot of data from hydro and just other groups that will help us analyze where those flooding issues are or whatever the resiliency issue is in that area. And a big part of it is just keeping all of those resiliency stakeholders involved throughout the process so they can help us, we can share information, and they can work with us on the CTP. So last year in May, we kicked off, we call it our pilot study for adding resiliency to the CTPs. So we started a 3-county CTP, the Camden, Currituck, Pasquotank. We call it CCP CTP, which is very hard to say. But we kicked that off, and here's where those areas are on the map. So as you can see, they're out on the coast, kind of out in the Outer Banks, and so they experience a lot of flooding. So we thought this would be a great pilot study to use this formalized resiliency guidance that we have and apply it. And so we, along with our team at AECOM, have kind of been working through this. And like I mentioned, this area experiences a lot of flooding. Here's a couple snips from different news articles and Facebook groups. But yeah, they get terrible flooding out there, even sunny day flooding. So there's definitely a need to add this resiliency component to their CTP. So far, we're kind of at the beginning of the study still. But what we did was we have been following that guidance. So we emailed all of the key environmental agencies when we kicked off the study that will be involved in all this resiliency guidance. I know it might be a little hard to read, but that SIP there is from the Community Understanding Report. So we added some questions on resiliency in there to make sure that that's included. And last fall, we had our public input survey. And we made sure that we had some resiliency-based questions in that as well. And so here's some of the responses that we got. One of the questions is, how well prepared is our region to handle hurricanes, flooding, or other disasters? So the majority of people said somewhat prepared or not prepared. So again, just highlighting that this is an issue in the area that needs to be kind of addressed. And the next question is, what would help your community better respond to emergencies or natural hazards? So a lot of people had mentioned improved drainage and stormwater management. So that's kind of, we can connect in hydro, get them connected to this area. But people also mentioned prioritizing flood-prone areas and transportation planning. So that's kind of where it comes into play with our group, where we can help incorporate that in the CTP. And here's a map also from the public survey. The citizens were asked to drop a pin where the resilience and evacuation needs were. And so as you can see, there's quite a few pins there around Elizabeth City. There's a lot along US 158, some along US 17, leading out of Elizabeth City. So this is good because we can just start to gather all this data and see kind of where we need to focus in for the CTP. And here's some of the comments that we received from that public input survey that are, talking about flooding and whatnot. So very much is an issue in the area, and it's good to just have this all documented in a report as well. So we're in the process currently of kind of collecting all of the data and making new maps that we add to our CTPs that focus in on resiliency. So here's one of the maps. This is a draft, but this is just focusing on the inundation in the area. So you can see there's a lot of red and a little bit of purple in these 3 counties. So we've been working a lot with the hydro unit at NCDOT as well as other units to just collaborate more and take some of this valuable data that they have and make sure that it gets included in our CTP. And Kurt's going to talk a little bit more about some of the specifics of this data, but here's just one of our first draft maps that we put together. So some lessons that we've learned so far is just communicate often and early. So like I mentioned earlier, just getting those key environmental agencies and resiliency folks together from the very beginning. And we found it's been really helpful to just set one-on-one meetings and meet with those people and learn from them and see what data they have, what data we have, how we can combine that together and use that to help our CTP. And the next steps is we're continuing to work through this. So we're kind of in the data analyzing section right now. So we're going to work to make even more maps and just highlight all of the resiliency and include it in the CTP. And our goal is to complete it by the end of the year. And we really hope that this CTP will be a strong example for resiliency inclusion in the future. And CTPs after this can kind of use this as an example. And we also hope to train MPOs and RPOs in the future on how they can use that resiliency data in some of their plans, like MTPs and things like that. And yeah, here's our contact information. These are all the people that are working on the CTP. But thank you.
Hi, how are you guys doing? My name's Crystal. I work in the geotech section up in the mountains for NCDOT. And we're going to talk about rock slides and landslides and embankment failures, which are really exciting and wonderful. And so this presentation has changed a little bit because of Helene. But what is resiliency and what does it mean to geotech? Basically, it's, so geotech made, back in the 90s, there was a rockfall hazard rating system, and that was developed in out in the West where there were huge rock slide and rockfall problems, like think Colorado and Washington and Oregon. But here, our slopes don't typically just let loose like they do out in Colorado. So our rating system focuses less on risk assessment and more about impact. So it's basically, it's a ranked significance that's based on traffic disruption and economic impact. And these are two things that so a lot of the other hazard rating systems don't actually delve into is that the indirect costs of landslides. And so mostly when we have a huge, I-40 is a great example, because when back in 2009, 2010, when that huge rockfall happened in I-40, they ended up doing an economic impact study because economically, I mean, there's only 3 main ways for big trucks and things to get in and out of Asheville. And so I-40, when it shut down, they did an economic impact study. And I can't remember who did it. Somebody we contracted. And I think it was HDR, maybe. And it was something we needed to think about. So when we think about our assets, we think of our facilities, and the facilities are our roads. And one of the other goals that we wanted to do was make sure that we collected and captured all of the institutional knowledge. So most of the time, institutional knowledge meant the people that had been around for a really long time and knew about these landslides and knew about these places that were repeat offenders. And we wanted to make sure that we took everything out of their brains and put it somewhere so that if something happened again in a place that had already fallen, that we would be able to have that information. So our study area, it's all the places that have mountains. It's 11, divisions 11, 13, and 14. I always want to say 12, but it's just because numerically it makes sense. All right. So in our rating system, we have 12 categories, and each of the categories is either a sum or a multiplier, and each category is based on, if it's a multiplier, it's because it makes a bigger impact. So, for example, precipitation is a huge impact, so we know that landslides and embankment failures happen because of at least 5 inches of rain in a 12-hour period. No, 24-hour period, sorry. So what that means is that precipitation is a multiplier. So if we get a lot of precipitation, then we know we need to start looking out. Lost my train of thought, sorry that. Okay, speaking of precipitation, so if a big storm system comes through and we know that there are areas that we need to be looking out for, because all of the places that we have, with the exception, like Helene threw it all out of the water. So, but previously it was that we knew we had done a geological engineer assessment on each of these places, and we knew that they'd either slid in the past or they looked unstable now and could be potentially, given enough time and rain, that, that it could be a problem. And geologists work on, millions of years. Sometimes they ask us, they're like, oh, well, when will that fall? And we're like, I don't know, any time between now and the next 500 years? So, okay, bridge watch was something that we started doing. Hydraulics unit started kick that up, and Kurt's going to talk about it more from their side. But Geotech has specific points of big slides that we like to monitor. And so BridgeWatch is a monitoring system where if there's enough precipitation that will ding a threshold on a stream gauge, then we know that enough rain has fallen in an area that we're interested in. And so that's a good indicator that we need to go out and check it out. And it has been great. There have been a couple times where we've gotten a ding on it and traveled out to the site, and there was actually a problem. Okay. Okay, so each category, multiplier or sum, we come up with a total score. The thing with these is that the base unit of the route type is the most important thing. So we have interstates and other strategic 4 lanes, and then it breaks down from there. So we have primary 2-lane and then secondary roads, tertiary roads. And so you can imagine I-40 and the major interstates and the strategic routes have a higher base level score. So once we put input, we go to a site, we input all the information, it calculates a total score for us. So depending on the route and depending on where that score falls, will tell us if it rates high enough to make sure that we have a plan in place. So just to give you an idea of the numbers, in between 1,700 and 1,900 for an interstate and a 4-lane, that's something that warrants some inspection. So there's a little baby Clay, and he is 5'11", just to give you some scale. This happened in, this is outside of, like in between Canton and Candler on I-40. It's about mile marker 37, I think. And this huge debris flow happened in the middle of the road. And the reason why, you would think it's huge. There was a lot of material. It went all the way across 4 lanes, hit the divider, flopped over it, and was in the other lane. And you would think it would be, how much time do I have? I'm good? Okay. So you would think it would rate really high, but it only rated 146. And the reason why is because all of the material came out. There's nothing left. So we went out there and we looked at it from an engineering perspective, and we're like, if it rains again, this is not going to be a problem. And hopefully. Oh no. Oh, it didn't do. How do I make it do? How do I make that go?
Oh. Great question. What showing is it?
No. Well, if anybody wants to see it,
We'll try to get it at the end.
I'll describe it. Basically, it was before the emergency services showed up, and this guy has his cell phone, and this thing, all of this material comes flushing down onto the interstate, and he's driving by like, hey guys, look at this. And so then you see the cops roll up, and they're like, keep going. I just want to stress the importance of not driving underneath things that are moving above you. Oh, I lost my, sorry guys. Where did it go? I know, but where's my, oh, there it is. Okay. Next. I-40, it's at the top of the mountain. Old Fort's on one side, Black Mountain's on the other. This is Ridgecrest. This thing is insane. When Helene hit, it rained so hard that all of the water percolated through the soil, and there were holes as big as somebody's face where water shot out and it liquefied the whole slope, and the thing just evacuated all over the road. I mean, you can see there's so much material. There's still stuff up there. And we had designed a debris flow barrier. There was so much, again, like I say, Helene, nobody expected this. If there was a normal precipitation, a heavy precipitation event, our barrier would have held. But anyway, and then the really fun video is somebody caught it in a rear dash cam, and this thing flies over, like, lets loose from the hill and jumps over the barrier, and it's like a Tyrannosaurus Rex in Jurassic Park, where he's driving away, and this thing is like, okay, and you saw, it's a pretty high. The reason why it's still high is because we knew that there was still movement that would happen in a big rain event, but we had done some mitigation to it. So 5 minutes, I can do it. So once we rate a slide and then we do stuff to it, we'll rate it again and see, what happens. So this is actually mile marker 7 on I-40, Harmon-Den. It originally rated at 1031, and then we mitigated it, and that it cuts the score really, if we fix it, if it's not going anywhere, then it cuts the score down. Okay, so originally in 2016, when I started doing this, we concentrated on the strategic routes, interstates, and 4 lanes that are really important for movement in and out of Western North Carolina. And so on the left, upper left, those are all the ones that we did, that we knew were going to be a problem. And then on the right, these are all the things that fell during Helene. It changed the game. On the left, these are all specific geotech hazard failures. And on the right, that was everything that happened. So maintenance was pretty busy trying to make the whole western part of the state work. They are mostly embankment failures this time around. This is just for Helene, and landslides. And we know that because rain makes embankment failures and landslides happen. Not so much for rock slides and rockfall. So what do we do with this? I mentioned that that the significance is ranked based on the type of route. So we figure out which ones rank the highest. We do an executive summary, which includes recommendations and design plans that we can hand off to other units. I did it. So if anybody wants more information, that's my email, and then Clay Elliott is my supervisor, and he knows all about it too. All right, thanks, y'all.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Kirk Golembeski with the hydraulics unit, and we'll talk about planning and design for resiliency with a real focus on high water and flooding as well. I work with Matt in the hydraulics unit. I'm lucky enough to work with Pam, Crystal, Amanda, those in TPD, as well as the folks over in strategic initiatives as well that has changed. So we're going to go through resilience studies. So I'm going to go through resilience studies. I'll show you how we look at high water for design purposes as well, and then our flood tools. And I just want to say thanks to everyone who has used our flood tools in the past, and also encourage those that haven't to have a look at them in the future. Even if you don't need them for work, personal use, just getting your family around during a high water event, they're definitely very useful for that as well. So we'll be on the last slide I have is how to get to those tools. So first of all, resilience studies. We want to know what the current and the future conditions hold for some of our key corridors in the state. Those would be US 74, US 70, and then future I-87 that we have conducted these. These are studies that take into account future traffic loads as well as our future traffic demand model. Takes into account economies along the routes, military influences, and the disruptions we primarily focus on are flooding and heat on these. We have one in the out west that we're considering that would include also landslides and debris slides as well. They're typically about 10 miles wide, and they take into account everyone that travels along the corridor as well as across the corridor. We call them disruptions, and it's how people are disrupted by high water, either by flood events, but if you're on the coast, also sunny day events as well. So in Wilmington on the US 74, we take into account sea level rise over time and essentially how close the water gets within 2 feet of our road, or top of road, for influences with sunny day flooding or nuisance flooding and cyclic flooding. We then sort of quantify that, and we look at the total disruptions, the time, and the economic impact on those corridors. We've wrapped up all 3 of those, and you can find all 3 of those on our resilience, our public-facing NCDOT resilience site under studies. Second is, now, when we get into design, I'm going to go over 3 examples here, and really for flooding, what it comes down to is we have choices to do. Can we lift the road above the flooding so it isn't impacted by the high water? Does the road need to stay where it is Elevation-wise, we need to make sure it stays where it is after a flood event as well. And then on the coast, we look at not only do you have to keep the roadbed above the water surface elevation, we look at the low chord of the bridge above waves. Waves have a tendency to hit bridges, and they tend to knock them over, especially on the coast. Just like in Helene, you have momentum of the water traveling quickly, resulted in a number of a high level of bridges impacted by Helene. On the coast, we have waves that are hitting our bridges that really come into them being like tons of water hitting every couple seconds against our bridges. Adaptive design, it was on I-95. It was in design at the time. We had Matthew and Florence. The governor pretty much said I-95 should not flood again in the future. So we got our pens down and worked on what we needed to do to get I-95 above Matthew and Florence, which was a 100-year event plus 1.5 feet of freeboard. Matt worked heavily on that, and we conducted, as you see in the middle and the bottom, is 2D modeling that has been done in that area. If anyone's been in that area, Lumberton is a crazy area hydraulically. You have about 3 rivers, streams all coming together just on the north side of I-95. Also an area on our flood warning system that we really track very closely during all events. The second one, so that's I-95. We were raising it up so it was above the flood of record so that it would not be impacted, so that we really reduce the number of disruptions in the future, right? That's a strategic route, it's freight, and it's also a traveling public. Alligator River Bridge is a little different. That's also trying to keep it high enough, but it's for future wave action in this case. We want to keep that low chord above future sea level rise and then resulting waves above that. Waves tend to generate their height based on what's beneath them. So the higher the water with sea level rise means you're going to have then resulting higher waves than you currently had. So that's also something to take into account. If you guys are at the beach and you're looking at what the wave height is, if you see the wave height, you know how deep the water is underneath it. It's usually about 2/3 the depth. So we also, in design, we brought in what we used in Harker's Island. We use the glass fiber reinforced rebar, as well as sort of lighter concrete as well. So lessons learned on one being applied to another design as well in Alligator River. We conducted a couple sea level rise and hydrodynamic wave modeling, and then it resulted in our low chord being at 16.5 feet. So the third example, so I've done one where we're putting the road above the water, one where we're putting the low chord above the future waves, and now the third is we've got to keep the road where it is elevation-wise, but we now need to make sure it's there after it overtops. So for this example, we have between Clayton and I-40 down towards Wilmington, NC-24. This project has been designed. It's currently, as you'll see I'll go to the next slide, it's on the STIP for 2031, but it's washed out twice during both Matthew and Florence. So this is a case of you're driving down the road, the water is rolling over the road. Essentially, the road has become a berm or a dam, and especially down east, this is what happens. Water's not moving all that fast. It's just piling up behind the road. So it's rolling over the road, and on that downstream embankment, as the water gets over about 2 feet per second, it starts to churn up and starts to erode away, and slowly it creeps back to the pavement, then it wraps under the pavement, and now starts to collapse underneath, and it just works its way back depending on how long the water's flown over the road. So the solution for engineering-wise is reinforce or armor that downstream toe and downstream embankment. We're doing it here. We also have a project right now on US 74 near where the Lumber River passes under it, where we're looking to reinforce that section too. So you can use concrete, you can use riprap, which we've used on I-40 near the Northeast Cape Fear. In this case, we're looking at a geogrid and laying that down on it and then filling it with concrete. It's not with concrete, sorry, with soil. Helps out with maintenance. That's one of the things we are concerned with when we're talking to divisions is, hey, we're doing resiliency. There's a number of ways that we can reinforce this embankment. What would work best for you from a maintenance standpoint as well? So this area, this is the current plan that will reinforce that down slope and resulting grass, so it's easier for the maintenance side of things. Again, that's currently on the STIP for 2031. The one thing I want to note that Matt had mentioned is that down in the bottom left corner, the cost-benefit analysis, we're looking at 4 on this one. Resiliency tend to go between 3 and 5, in a cost-benefit analysis. So they typically, yes, they cost more, but If you have a road that is in service for an extra day or two that it wouldn't have been, you can do the math on the economic impacts of that very quickly become very prevalent and pay for itself in general. The next one I want to mention, though, this is the third one, sort of the fourth example. This is sort of a combination of us looking at natural solutions. We have a very strategic route that goes between Swansboro that connects Camp Lejeune, the Coast Guard, Fort Macon, and then Cherry Point. If this section of road overtops or washes out, then you have an 80-mile detour, which nobody would be all that happy with, especially for the folks that are driving to work on posts at Camp Lejeune every day. So here, the idea here is to reduce the impacts, the energy that the waves have as they approach the road. So that by the time they hit the embankment, they essentially they're knocked down, almost like cordgrass does out in the marsh. They roll into the cordgrass, knocks the cordgrass down. All you get is a little ripple against the shoreline. What we use here is a living shoreline. You guys may have heard that term before. We have about 1,000 feet of living shoreline out there. The permitting side of things, we work with the Corps. We wanted to go farther out initially. We needed to come in a little closer so that we could balance it. So this project not only is an example, like engineering-wise and environmentally-wise, of a very sustainable project, also from a permitting and collaboration is a very strong example of how we're able to work with our both coastal Fed and the coastal management, the Corps, and a number of other agencies and counties to get what looks like a short project, but a very complicated and effective project too. You see those oyster baskets. We had oysters on those in about a week to 2 weeks. So nature sort of naturally comes to the project. One interesting fact of this, though, as we were permitting it, is that you never anticipate. If you look on that top right picture, you see sort of a deeper water there where it's bluer, just on the other side of our riprap. That actually was a canoe kayaking shortcut that people would take that we didn't know about until we started to talk to the locals. And they're like, hold on a second, your project cannot get in the way of our sort of canoe path that we have on your side. So again, we took that into account. Okay, and then resiliency in action. This is Yancey 40 bridge out on NC 197. It washed out during Fred. This was the resulting impacts along the bank. We lost about 6,000 cubic yards of dirt. Keep in mind a dump truck that you have on a site's about 9? About 9 cubic yards-ish? So do you do the math on how many dump trucks of soil that we lost during Fred in that area? It wasn't just the only bridge, though. We lost 20 bridges at the time through that area. We went back through. We fixed it. We built one crazy big, amazing end wall that had 45-degree bends and sort of just keyed into the soil and bedrock. We also did riprap on either side and gabion baskets upstream and downstream of this. So this is a true test, a stress test, we could say, of what occurred during Helene. Is it still there? Yeah, we lost some of the gabion baskets. We lost some of the geotech fabric on either side of it. But that end wall that held true, the bridge was continued to be in service during the entire event. So we have bridges, we've moved them, we've adjusted them for resiliency. Now it gets into how do you keep an eye on things during an event, or how do you keep an eye on things after an event as well for predictive analysis. Here in hydraulics and others, we have 3 tools that we look after. We have the Feynman tool. That's a public-facing tool. I definitely recommend you have a look at it. We have TSAP, and that is a fancy way of saying that we're looking and working with UNC and the modeling that they do in a model called ADCIRC. And they run when a hurricane's coming in, they run their model, and then we map essentially where the storm surge will be along the coast. The third, and I'll get into a bit more detail about each 3 of these. Crystal mentioned Bridge Watch. That's really, we're keeping an eye on bridges, sags, earthquakes, and geotechnical events to provide alerts to us in hydro and anyone in DOT as well. All right, so Feynman. What we have in Feynman is what it comes down to is we are able to click on a gauge site. We have 362 of them around the state. There are over 750 stream gauges available on Feynman. You can click on a site, and then you can look at what the road impacts are. Either currently, you can run like scenarios just to do what ifs if you're planning level, or you can also, at about 50-odd sites, you can look at the forecasts from the River Forecast Center. So This is what we use operationally. We work with TSO as well in the State Emergency Operations Center during events to sort of be the crystal ball of where it's going to flood as best we can tell. This is one of our main tools. It is through a fantastic partnership that we have had with emergency management for the past 15 to 20 years. We've worked with them. It really stepped up after Florence, so we're thankful for their partnership with us in developing this tool and working with them. The other one, if you're in one of the 20 coastal counties, you're going to be interested in this one. This is TSAP, and this is, again, this is giving you the maximum water service elevation from storm surge during a hurricane event across all counties and across the 20 counties. You can zoom into an area. You can look at what the height of the water is. You can look at the extent of the water. We don't have the duration that it's flooded and the timing. We are working on that. So it is a maximum over 5 days, just to sort of throw a caveat of what you're looking at on there. I mean, it's really good from a standpoint of its hot spots, right? You're looking, okay, a hurricane's coming in. Where do I need to be concerned in Division 2? Is it going to be New Bern, what area, or is it going to be Division 3? How much do I need to worry about? The Southern Shores area, or up north usually, if you're in Division 1, then we're looking at the Outer Banks. And then you can drill into much detail as you want as well. So the third tool that we have for operational is BridgeWatch, as mentioned. What BridgeWatch boils down to is that it is a system where we have at all of our 16,000 bridges and large culverts, we have precip data. So if a certain event comes in, we'll get a warning to say, hey, in the next 6 inches, 5 inches, say for geotech or the bridge, you're going to get this much rainfall. You could have an issue here. If we have a gauge there, then it's a different story. Then we can sort of go in, and as you can see on that picture in the top, right in the center, now we have a gauge, we know a water level, we know that relationship of the gauge. I might have to go back to that one, because that one still apparently has a timing on it. So that one tells you where it is related to freeboard. And I'll do this one last time, and then I will fix that later on. So, again, BridgeWatch, there we go. So we're done with BridgeWatch. I hope you paid attention. Let's move on. But in all seriousness, though, it does give you warnings based on the water level to the low chord and to overtopping. So if you want to know if the water is at low chord, you have a gauge, we'll send you a warning. Structures uses that a lot afterwards to then sort of triage where to go for inspections, right? You don't want to go to bridges that weren't impacted by a storm, but you want to focus on those that were or were overtopped. So the last tools that I'll go through as I wrap up are you're thinking about planning. This was mentioned by Amanda, is being currently used by CTP. We're working with them more and more so that they integrate our flood data that we have. And the planning tools come in handy not only for planning, but also we've also sort of operationally used it as well. So the RAFT tool is an umbrella for 2 other tools. It's our flood inundation tool, roadway inundation tool, and then our coastal roadway inundation simulator. So all fun stuff. What a boil on the roadway inundation tool. So we're all sort of familiar with our 100-year floodplain, right? If we bought a house, we're looking to make sure it's not in the 100-year floodplain. Us in hydraulics, Matt will not hire you if your house is in the 100-year floodplain, just to let you know. That is the first screening tool that he uses. So this is the tool you could use to save your reputation and your career. So what we do here is we take all the FEMA floodplains that emergency management develops. We've got the 10 through 500. We've also beefed it up with up to the 1,000 as well, both in riverine and then areas outside of the river areas as well, called pluvial flooding, which is just like where it pools up outside of the stream banks. We're adding that in across the state slowly as we can, as it's available. And it just shows, at the 10-year event, how much water is on the road. Okay, at a 100-year event, this is where the flooding occurs, is what it provides. It's used for planning because in a division, if you want to know sort of where your hot spots are, just turn on the 10-year flood event. That's the most frequent flood event you have. So those are where your roads are going to flood most frequently. During Helene, we use this to crank it up to like the 100 and 500-year event and say, okay, what roads 2 days ahead of time, we know it's a 100-year event, what roads might be impacted? And we can almost see Helene before it happened on this tool, 2 days beforehand. So the other one, the other tool now, we got riverine covered. We've got to cover the coast. The key features of this is that you can turn on, it's a sea level change, so you can go from 0. We show up 17 feet on the tool. If you really want to get into like the worst case scenario, we can go up to like 32 to 35 feet that we have we sort of have behind the scenes too, but hopefully we don't need to do that. And it shows for each level, it will show the amount of roads that are impacted. It will quantify it by state routes and interstates and NC routes as well. The feature that's being used a lot, though, is on the right side. It's called a hindcast model, which is looking backwards on things. Is what hurricanes have impacted roads over the over 4 hurricanes. So we looked at 4 hurricanes, we mapped them, and then we ranked them according to how frequently the road is impacted. So if you want to say, if you're telling a story in your county of how sort of flood prone your road has been in the past, you can look at this tool real quick and say, hey, I know that road is flooded for 4 events, and it's about 3 feet deep for each of those events. Done. And then so this is just to access. So you said you used the tools. Thank you very much. If you haven't used the tools, you have no excuse for not using the tools now because I've just shown you how to get to them. And I'd appreciate it. Honestly, though, we're always taking any comments. We appreciate the divisions using our flood tools. We appreciate you guys sitting in on the trainings that we host as well before hurricane season, and just really appreciate your input, as well as the consultants working on these projects as well. This is how to get hold of myself. I look after the flood warning program, and then Paul Tosh supports me, and then there are others as well. Those are the key contacts for us. With that, I'll wrap up and turn to Pam to bring us home to lunch.
Thank you for having me. I hate that I'm the one standing between you and lunch, but I am going to try to wrap up. You've heard of all the bits and pieces, and maybe now show the foundation and how it works within NCDOT. So the foundation for the recent concentration on resilience within NCDOT comes from federal and state guidelines that have recently come out. You see that there is, in metropolitan long-range planning, it's required to look at resilience. In the asset management, there's also a requirement from the federal to look at the transportation asset management plans, to develop those, and how are we going to make all of our assets last the longest. There's also Executive Order 80 in North Carolina, and that was the beginning in North Carolina. It was a very pivotal moment for considering resilience. That's made a clear statement that North Carolina was going to look at how to limit the impacts of climate change and also clean transportation. With that came out of it, one of the great things, I think, to help you when you're looking for information on resilience and what's being done is that an annual status report is every year is required. And that's a great report to go to see what the state is doing. NCDOT also developed a resilience policy and a resilience improvement plan. This shows of the Executive Order 80, the importance of that. And again, I stress to y'all to look for that. That's a picture of the 2025 Climate Strategy Report. Review that. Find out what we're doing across our department. It's not just the groups up here, but lots. In the resilience policy, it defines resiliency. It defines the department's resilience integration, and it provides a strategic framework for the department's resilience efforts. The policy came about in 2021, and then in 2024, after the policy, NCDOT developed a resilience improvement plan. It includes all of the primary roads, the interstates, the evacuation routes, the US, and the NC routes. It looked at the usage, the type of usage of the corridors, truck traffic, redundancy. It looked at social economic information of the area for the road and the health and safety. What is the proximity to hospitals, shelters, and utilities? And then in addition to the interstates, it did the Criticality that included the evacuation routes and the existing and new interstates proposed in the state. It's an excellent resource to start. Again, it's high level. It lists specific projects, though, and with having a resilience improvement plan for things within this plan, we get a discount in funding when it comes time for the federal funding. We have a resilience team and the stakeholders. In the NCDOT, it starts with our executive leadership. And then we have an NCDOT resilience management team made up, and I'll cover who's on that in a little bit. And the Board of Transportation has noted the importance of resilience and has recently added resilience to the technology committee. There's an interagency coordination team, IRT, and I'll go over the members of that in a few slides. And then we work with our MPOs and RPOs and other internal and external agencies. Our resilience team, management team, is made up of the statewide initiatives group, the Transportation Planning Division, Aviation, Environmental Policy Unit, Hydraulics, Geotech Unit, and Planning and Programming. But they're not the only ones. Right now, that's the team, but it goes beyond that within NCDOT. Highway design looks at its structures, roadway, operations, transportation mobility and safety unit, materials and testing, IMD, and all of the divisions. And I'm sure there are other units. That's just the tip of the iceberg, as they would say. So in the North Carolina Interagency Resilience Team, and this slide is important because it shows that we can't just work with other NCDOT units. There are lots of other agencies within North Carolina that has information that is helpful in our planning, and that we should collaborate and work together. On the IRT, it's the Department of Transportation, Department of Commerce. The Department of Environmental Quality has several groups within it. The Department of Information Technology, Department of Military and Veterans Affairs, Wildlife Resource Commission, Department of Natural and Cultural Resources, Public Safety. You think that maybe there wouldn't be something for revenue or public safety or the adult correction. But every time I go to these IRT meetings, I come away with, wow, they've got some information that might be useful. I need to reach out to them at times. Think outside the box would be my message there. We also, as many on our panel have already stressed, we don't do it in a silo. We work with so many other North Carolina partners on our projects. As Kurt said, the North Carolina Emergency Management has been instrumental in working with us and providing data. The State Climate Office, UNC Marine Science, DEQ, from the State Resilience Office, they have a flood resilience blueprint. If you're not, they're working with the communities right now along 6 river basins, but they'll continue looking at river basins across the state as they get more funding. Look and know those areas. They're collecting data. They have a tool that you might be able to use in some of the work that you do. But you can't use it if you don't know about it. That's why we're here. The coastal management and DEQ, the North Carolina Coastal Federation has been important. Our Department of Military and Veteran Affairs. We have numerous military facilities in North Carolina. Just learned last week that it's the second largest industry after agriculture in North Carolina. So it's important to work with that. They have a lot of information, and what we do impacts them, what they do impacts us. The MPOs and the RPOs and the USAC out of Wilmington. So here are a list of resources. We're about to enter the wall of words. Don't worry about it. You're going to get the presentation so that you can click. It's better to equip you, I feel like, with a link than a picture that tells you there are resources. One of the best is the North Carolina Sustainable and Resilient Center of Excellence called NSURE. And it's out of ITRI, and it's $1 million worth of funding to do research on resilience and how we can help, how it can impact our area by planning for it. Here's your wall of words. Don't worry about it, but they're all linked, and I tried to make sure that the links work because we discovered in the past year or so that links to resilience resources can ever-changing. So as of last week, these links were all good. And that's just, again, the tip of the iceberg on resources. NCDOT, though, the first one is our resilient webpage for DOT, and it links to a lot of resources. Here's a list so that you know, National Highway Resilience Research. Look at, this is just some of the projects. This is since 2015 to present that deal with resilience. We also have research projects just out of North Carolina DOT, resilience research. Again, a lot of projects. Maybe one of these is in an area you're doing work with and has data that can help inform your project. The NCDOT management, resilience management team is here to help you. We listed on this slide earlier the different agencies, but for up here, you can reach out to myself, Matt, Kurt are on it. If you have a project and you want to know, is there some way or data on resilience that can help inform that project, reach out to us and we'll try to connect you with the people who can help you. That's the contacts for all of us up here. And I think that's it. I think. We're going to go back to the. I guess we have a few minutes for questions. Yes, lunch follows this, but if you have a few minutes, if anybody has questions, I'll open it up to everyone up here. Now, might want to turn your mics back on. Any questions? I read the lunch menu coming in. Does anybody want to know what that was? There's chicken and roast beef.
So when you had the DOT resiliency policy posted, it said that it would be reviewed in 2025. Have we started the review of that?
We did have a review, minor. We haven't implemented changes that were very minor at the time. We were waiting for we're actually waiting to review it again with the new Board of Transportation Resilience team.
Let's say a municipality wants to do a resiliency project, how would that score through SPOT? I mean, let's say they've got a road that floods all the time and they would rather, raise it up so it doesn't flood in.
Right. No one up here is with that group, with the SPOT scoring group, but I can tell you what we've been told as other people have asked that question. Is that every other year the SPOT team, they have a group from across the state of people who look at the scoring process, and that they're looking at how to consider resilience within scoring. So it's known to be an issue. It's known it's being considered. It's the best I can tell you.
No, we'd have to, foot truth it. So we'd have to go and so most of the slides that are in the database, we've actually gone. One of us in our unit has gone and done an extensive characterization of it, so we know what type of failure it is and what are the consequences of that. And so if we know that the rain in that area is high enough and we're like, oh, okay, this is a landslide, then we know that we really need to get out there and look at it because water makes landslides and embankment failures happen. So we wouldn't know until after we actually got there and assessed the situation. Yeah, we do that all the time. It's a real pain in the butt for other people.
All right, and there's mashed potatoes.
Chip, are there any other Any thoughts there? Okay. All right. Well, everybody, thank you, and thanks to the team here for putting on this presentation. And enjoy lunch. Thank you.